Daniel had always lived a quiet life, the kind that did not leave many marks on the world but brought peace to the heart. He was not a man who talked much, and people in town often said his silence made him mysterious. Some thought he carried a painful past. Others believed he simply preferred his own company. The truth was somewhere in between. He had lost too many things: work, family, trust. And he had traveled far from his old life, looking for a place where he could start again without questions. When he arrived at the wealthy widow Eleanor's ranch, he did not expect anything more than a roof and a day's work. Eleanor saw something different in him. She was a woman used to managing everything alone. After her husband passed away years ago, the ranch became her world: every fence, every horse, every acre. She had money, land, workers, but no one she could truly depend on. People respected her, but no one stayed close for long. She had learned to act strong, even when she felt tired. And when Daniel showed up looking for work, dusty from travel yet calm and steady, she felt a strange pull to trust him. She gave him a job on the spot. Daniel proved himself quickly. He woke before sunrise and finished long after sunset. When storms hit the ranch, he was the one who stepped out in the cold to check the cattle. When a horse panicked, he was the one who calmed it without raising his voice. The other workers liked him but also kept their distance. Daniel had a way of keeping his thoughts private, and people sensed that asking too many questions would only push him away. Eleanor watched him work almost every day from her porch. She didn't mean to, but her eyes followed him more than anyone else. At first she told herself it was because he worked better than the others. Then she convinced herself it was because she needed someone trustworthy during dangerous times. But the real reason was simpler. Daniel made the ranch feel alive again. He reminded her of what strength looked like when it came from kindness instead of authority. As the months passed, Daniel became her most dependable worker. Whenever something went wrong, he was there. Whenever she needed to travel to town, he quietly saddled her horse without being asked. When she felt lonely, she sometimes found comfort just knowing he was somewhere on the ranch. She never said this out loud. Of course, she was a widow, and he was her cowboy. She believed there were lines she should not cross. But her heart crossed them anyway, one small step at a time. Everything changed one afternoon when a group of men arrived at her ranch with papers in hand. They were the distant relatives of her late husband, and they claimed they had a right to part of her land. They spoke loudly, acting as if they already owned everything they touched. Eleanor tried to stay calm, but their words shook her. They said they would take the matter to court, that she would lose the ranch, that the land never truly belonged to her alone. She knew how hard legal battles could be, and she had no one to stand beside her if things became ugly. Daniel saw her distress and walked toward the group, his steps slow but firm. He didn't shout or threaten them. He simply stood between them and Eleanor, a steady wall of calm strength. The men tried to challenge him, but something in his eyes, quiet, determined, unafraid, made them step back. When they left, they promised to return, but for the moment, the danger passed. Eleanor stood silently for a long time after they were gone, her heart pounding. That evening the ranch felt unusually still. The workers finished their tasks early, leaving Eleanor and Daniel alone near the barn. The sunset painted the sky in soft orange colors, but Eleanor's thoughts were dark. She had never felt so vulnerable. She had money and land, but neither could fight for her. She needed someone she could trust completely. Someone with a strong back and a steady heart. And the only person who fit that description was standing beside her, brushing dust off his sleeves as if nothing unusual had happened. She asked him to sit with her on the wooden bench near the barn. Daniel obeyed quietly, sensing she needed support. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. Her voice trembled slightly, something he had never heard from her before. "Daniel, I'm going to say something strange," she began, "but I need you to understand why." He listened without interruption. She told him everything, how the relatives threatened the ranch, how the law could turn against her, how she might lose the land if she didn't have someone to legally protect the property with her. She explained how vulnerable she truly felt, though she never showed it to anyone else. And then, with a breath that seemed to shake her whole body, she said the words that would change both their lives. "Marry me, or be exiled from this ranch forever." Daniel stared at her, stunned. He felt as if the whole world had stopped moving. He respected her deeply. But marriage? That was not something he had expected, not even in his wildest imagination. He had come here only to work and rebuild his life, not to become tied to someone he barely knew outside of work. Yet, the fear in her eyes made him pause. She wasn't trying to control him. She was scared, truly scared. He did not answer. He simply stood up slowly, removed his hat, nodded once, and walked away into the quiet night. Eleanor watched him disappear, her chest heavy with guilt. She regretted the way she said it the moment the words left her mouth. She had cornered him, and she knew it. But she also knew she had no one else to turn to. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of loneliness press down on her so hard it almost broke her. Daniel barely slept that night. He paced his small cabin, replaying her words. He did not feel anger toward her, only confusion. Marriage was not something to be used as protection or law. But he also understood her fear. She had built her life on this ranch, and now everything was threatened. She had stood strong for so long, but even strong people break when danger grows too close. He thought of leaving, packing his things and disappearing before dawn. But each time the idea crossed his mind, he remembered her standing there in the barn, her hands shaking, even though she tried to hide it. He remembered the way she had looked at him, not with power or command, but with genuine need. She was not a cold, rich woman. She was human. She was scared. And she had turned to him because she believed he was the only one who would not abandon her. When the first light of morning touched the sky, Daniel walked outside, breathing the cold air. The ranch stretched before him, quiet and peaceful, looking like the only home he had known in years. He realized how much the place meant to him, how much she had given him, how much he wanted to protect the ranch just as much as she did. He did not know what he would say to her yet. He only knew one thing. He could not walk away. Not now. Not when she needed him the most. And so, as the sun rose over the fields, Daniel headed toward her house, ready for a conversation that would shape the rest of his life. Daniel walked slowly toward Eleanor's house as the first morning light touched the ranch. The sky was still pale, the air cool, and the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the early breeze. He felt a tightness in his chest, not from fear, but from uncertainty. He was a man of action, someone who faced storms, wild horses, and long days without complaint. But matters of the heart and life decisions, with no clear answers, made him hesitate in a way battles with nature never did. Eleanor did not sleep much either. She spent the night pacing the wooden floors of her large house, staring out the windows, watching the shadows drift across the ground. She kept replaying her own words over and over, each time feeling worse. She knew she had cornered him, and she hated that she pushed him into a choice he never asked for. But she was desperate. And desperate hearts often reach for things they never intended to grab. When Daniel finally knocked on her door, Eleanor nearly froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She had no idea if he came to accept her offer, reject it, or simply tell her he was leaving. With trembling hands, she opened the door. Daniel stood straight, hat in hand, his face calm but serious. His eyes were tired, but steady. Eleanor stepped aside and allowed him inside. He walked in slowly, examining the room as if searching for the right place to stand. For a few moments, neither spoke. The quiet between them felt heavy, almost too heavy to bear. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. He spoke softly, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't sleep much," he said. "Your words stayed with me." Eleanor swallowed hard. She wanted to apologize immediately, but she waited, letting him finish. "I'm not angry," Daniel added, "but I need to understand why you said it that way." Eleanor took a deep breath and sat down on the edge of a wooden chair. Daniel remained standing, waiting for her explanation. She told him everything she had not dared to say before. She explained how the men who claimed the land were not only trying to take the ranch, they were trying to ruin her completely. She explained that if the case went to court, she would need someone legally tied to the land to help protect it. Without a husband or partner, she would appear vulnerable, easy to push aside. But then she confessed something deeper. Something she had not even admitted to herself until that night. "I asked you because you are the only person I trust," she whispered. "Not because I want to trap you, but because I feel safe when you are here." Daniel felt something shift inside him when he heard those words. He had always known she admired his work. But hearing that she trusted him, that she felt safe with him, was unexpected. It softened something in his heart that had been hard for a long time. "You shouldn't have felt alone in this," he said quietly. "You could have talked to me without giving me an ultimatum." Eleanor looked at him with regret filling her eyes. "I know. And I'm sorry. Truly. I spoke out of fear, not reason." Her apology was sincere, and Daniel felt it. He walked slowly toward the window, looking out at the ranch. He had spent months working there, putting in honest labor, finding peace in routine. The place had become more than a workplace, it had become his refuge, his second chance. That realization hit him deeper than he expected. "I don't want to leave," he said finally. Eleanor's breath caught. She stood up quickly, unable to hide her reaction. He turned and faced her fully, the morning light outlining his profile. "No, I don't. But marriage isn't something to force." She nodded, understanding. "I'm not asking anymore. Whatever you choose now will be your choice, not mine." Daniel studied her carefully. For the first time, he saw not the strong widow everyone respected, but a woman who had carried too much on her shoulders alone. A woman who had lost her partner long ago and never allowed herself to feel vulnerable since. A woman who had opened her heart in the only way she knew, direct, unfiltered, unguarded. He stepped a little closer. "I won't run from you," he said softly. "I won't abandon the ranch either." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. She had always controlled her emotions, but today felt different. Daniel's words were simple, but they reached deeper than any promise. They sat together at the small table, talking for a long time. They discussed everything, the threat from the relatives, the possible court case, and the future of the ranch. Daniel listened to every detail, understanding how tightly fear had closed around her heart. Eleanor spoke honestly, laying out her worries without hiding behind her usual strong tone. At one point she whispered, "If you decide to stay, I will never force marriage on you again." Daniel appreciated her honesty. He knew she meant it, but he also knew that staying meant he would naturally become more involved in her life. Emotionally, practically, and maybe even legally. It was a responsibility he didn't take lightly. Their conversation paused when sunlight filled the room completely, warming the wooden floors. Daniel looked around the house, noticing things he had never paid attention to before: the framed photographs, the handmade quilts, the books stacked neatly on shelves. This was Eleanor's home, filled with memories, hopes, and fears. Suddenly he felt the weight of what it meant for her to invite him into this world. Later in the day, Daniel went into town. Not to leave, but to think. He walked past the shops, listening quietly to the sounds of everyday life. But everywhere he went, he heard whispers. People had already begun talking. They said, Eleanor forced him. They wondered if he would take her money. Some even said he would leave her disappointed and alone. Daniel did not care much about gossip, but he felt the words like small stones thrown at his back. He was not a man who liked people questioning his integrity. He had lived simply, honestly, and with pride. The idea that the town saw him as someone who wanted to take advantage hurt him in ways he didn't expect. After a few hours, he made up his mind. He returned to the ranch before sunset. Eleanor was feeding the horses when he approached. When she saw him walking toward her, dust on his boots and determination in his eyes, she felt her heart tighten again, not from fear this time, but from something gentler and unfamiliar. Daniel stopped a few steps away. For a moment he simply watched her, as if memorizing the way she looked in the soft evening light. Eleanor set down the bucket and wiped her hands nervously. "I've made my decision," he said. Her breath hitched. She prepared herself for the worst, but hoped quietly for the best. "I'm not leaving you alone," Daniel said, firmly. Eleanor exhaled. A shaky breath she had been holding for hours. "Thank you," she whispered. "But," Daniel added gently, "we take this slow. No pressure. No marriage, unless both of us choose it." Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. Agreed. For the first time since everything began, they both felt relief. Not everything was solved, but they were no longer standing on opposite sides of fear. They were on the same side now against the threat, against the doubts, against the town's rumors. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor found herself standing next to Daniel in silence, feeling strangely peaceful. Daniel wasn't just a worker anymore. He was becoming something more, someone she could trust, someone she could lean on, someone she could perhaps build a future with, if time allowed. And Daniel, for the first time in many years, felt he was exactly where he was meant to be. The following days moved slowly, as if the ranch itself was holding its breath. Daniel continued his work like always, but something in the air had changed. He was no longer just a worker who kept his distance from the house. He found himself stepping inside more often. Sometimes to discuss ranch matters. Sometimes because Eleanor asked for his opinion. And sometimes because their quiet conversations simply felt natural now. The two of them did not talk about marriage again, but they talked about everything else: work, the weather, the cattle, the town, and sometimes even memories from their childhoods. Each conversation made the space between them feel smaller, but the town was not quiet. Rumors spread quickly, as they always did. Some people said Daniel had refused the widow's proposal. Others claimed he accepted, but only for money. A few believed Eleanor had lost her mind and forced him into a situation no man should endure. Every time Daniel went to town for supplies, he felt the weight of people's eyes on him. They whispered when he walked past. They nudged each other, and sometimes he even heard his own name mixed in with Eleanor's. Daniel had never cared much for gossip, but these rumors were different. They didn't just insult him, they insulted her. Eleanor, who had been strong her whole life, was now seen as desperate and controlling. One afternoon, when Daniel was tying his horse outside the general store, he overheard two men talking near the water trough. They spoke loudly enough for him to hear. "She must be scared to lose her land," one of them said. "Imagine forcing your own worker like that." The other man laughed. And he said, "Yes? That cowboy must be after something." Daniel's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but the words sank deep into him like small thorns. He didn't want Eleanor's name dragged through the dirt because of something he was involved in. He bought the supplies quickly and returned to the ranch, feeling the tension build inside him. Eleanor noticed it the moment he arrived. She was standing near the porch, trimming dry flowers from a pot, but she kept glancing toward him. His shoulders were tighter, his movements sharper than usual. "Long day?" she asked gently. Daniel set the supplies down and wiped the dust off his hands. "The town is talking again," he said. "A little too much. Axi." Eleanor sighed deeply. "They won't," Daniel replied. "Not until they see the truth. Not until they understand what really happened." Eleanor looked away, her eyes soft with worry. She hated that he had to face this because of her. She hated that her fear had invited trouble into his life. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted you to become part of gossip." Daniel shook his head. "You're not the problem. People just love noise." They shared a quiet moment. The kind that didn't need words. The evening light made the ranch glow, casting long shadows across the fields. It felt peaceful, even with all the outside storm. Daniel realized that the ranch had become his refuge, not the town, the ranch, and maybe even the woman standing in front of him. But peace didn't last long. A few days later, the relatives returned. Their wagon rolled up the dusty road, stopping right outside the ranch house. Eleanor stood on the porch, her heart beating fast but her face calm. Daniel walked out of the barn when he heard the approaching wheels, wiping his hands on a cloth and stepping beside her without being asked. The men climbed down, each wearing expressions full of anger and arrogance. They carried papers again, waving them like weapons. The leader spoke loudly, making sure his voice carried across the ranch. "We heard some interesting things," he said. "The widow forcing a cowboy to marry her? Quite a scandal." Eleanor felt anger rise, but she held steady. Daniel stepped forward, not aggressively but firmly. "The papers you brought last time were worthless," he said. "And the stories you spread won't change that." One of the men sneered. "You think you can protect her forever? You're just a worker." Daniel didn't flinch. A worker who stands where she needs him. Eleanor glanced at him, feeling a swell of gratitude. For a moment, the men hesitated. Something in Daniel's voice, calm, steady, absolutely unshakable, made them unsure. They had expected him to step away, to leave the widow alone. Instead, he stood closer to her. The leader tried again, louder this time. "This ranch belongs to the family line. She has no right to hold it alone. And you have no proof your claim is real," Eleanor replied sharply. "Leave now." The men exchanged glances, realizing they were not going to win today. But they still left with threats. "See you in court," the leader growled, before climbing back onto the wagon. When they were finally gone, Eleanor let out a shaky breath she had been holding for too long. Daniel stayed beside her, not saying anything at first. She knew he was thinking, planning, preparing. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to step in like that." "Yes, I did," he replied. "You're not alone in this anymore." Eleanor felt something warm move through her chest. She wanted to tell him how much that meant, but words didn't seem enough. The following weeks showed the ranch a new rhythm. Daniel and Eleanor spent even more time together, not intentionally, but naturally. They worked side by side, shared meals more often than before, and sometimes found themselves talking long after the sun had set. Their conversations were simple, yet meaningful. One evening, after the workers had gone home, Eleanor prepared tea in her kitchen and asked Daniel to join her. He sat across from her, the warm light of the lamp casting golden tones across his face. She studied him quietly, thinking about how much strength he carried in silence. "You've given me more peace than I've had in years," she said, surprising even herself with the honesty. Daniel looked down for a moment, then met her eyes. "You've given me a place to belong," he replied. The simplicity of the words made her heart flutter. She had grown used to living alone, believing that no one could fill the emptiness that followed her husband's passing. But with Daniel, the emptiness didn't feel so deep. She didn't feel like a lonely widow anymore. She felt like someone who could start again. As days passed, even the workers on the ranch noticed the closeness between them. They respected Daniel and admired Eleanor, and many quietly felt that the two made a good pair, balanced, steady, stronger together. When they worked together outside, the air between them always felt calmer, as if the ranch itself approved. One night, while checking the horses in the stable, Eleanor opened up about her fears again. She didn't speak loudly, just softly with her hand resting on a horse's mane. "They're coming after the ranch hard," she said. "I don't know how this will end." Daniel gently placed a hand on the horse as well, standing close enough for her to feel his presence. Together. That word echoed in Eleanor's mind long after she went to bed. Daniel wasn't just supporting her. He had chosen to be part of her life in a deeper way. He had chosen loyalty, trust, and partnership without being asked. And somewhere inside, Eleanor realized she had started caring for him in a way she had not expected. Not because she was lonely. Not because she needed protection. But because Daniel had shown her what it felt like to truly share burdens, share quiet moments, and share hope. The town could talk. The relatives could threaten. But Daniel and Eleanor were slowly building something no gossip or court claim could easily break. A bond formed not out of force, but out of trust, respect, and the kind of gentle connection that grows stronger with every shared challenge. And though neither had spoken the words out loud yet, both felt the same quiet truth. Their story was no longer about fear or desperation. It was becoming something much more real. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a heavy silence over the ranch. The sky was pale gray, the wind slow and cool, as if the world itself was unsure of what would happen next. Eleanor stood at the porch early, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea she barely drank. She watched the horizon, waiting for Daniel to step out of the barn like he always did. She needed to see him. His presence had become the one steady thing in her life, through the storm of threats and rumors. Daniel walked out finally, dressed neatly in a clean shirt and boots polished the best he could. He didn't dress that way often, but today demanded a different appearance. He wasn't going as a worker. He was going as someone standing beside Eleanor. Someone ready to protect not only the ranch, but her dignity, her peace, her future. Eleanor felt her heart calm a little when she saw him. He approached quietly, carrying his hat in his hand, looking serious but not afraid. Daniel was never afraid of real danger. But today he wasn't fighting nature or wild animals, he was facing people who twisted truth and used the law for greed. "You ready?" he asked softly. "As ready as I can be," she replied, forcing a small smile. They rode together in the wagon, side by side. The journey felt longer than usual. The town grew closer with each turn of the wheels, and Eleanor's nerves tensed more with every mile. Daniel noticed the way she kept adjusting her hands, gripping and releasing the fabric of her dress. Without saying a word, he reached over and rested his hand gently on hers. Eleanor looked at him, surprised but comforted. "We're going to face this the right way," he said. The word "together" felt stronger this time, more meaningful, as if the days leading up to this moment had tied them into something unbreakable. Eleanor breathed easier. When they arrived at the courthouse, the relatives were already there, standing proudly as if they had already won. They smirked when they saw Daniel and Eleanor walk in side by side. To them, Daniel was just a ranch worker, someone they thought could be easily pushed aside. They believed Eleanor was too fragile and too alone to fight. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Inside, people filled the benches. Curious townsfolk came to watch, hoping to witness a scandal or drama. Many whispered the moment Daniel and Eleanor stepped in. Some looked surprised to see Daniel walking confidently beside her. Others exchanged looks, as if they were rewriting the rumors in their minds. Eleanor walked with her chin slightly raised, her steps steady, but her eyes flicked toward Daniel from time to time. He matched her pace exactly, allowing her to lead, but staying close enough to give silent strength. When the hearing began, the relatives presented their claims loudly, waving papers, pointing fingers, acting as if the ranch belonged to them by destiny. They spoke about bloodline, inheritance, old agreements, and tried to paint Eleanor as someone who had taken more than she deserved. Eleanor listened with dignity, waiting for her turn. Then the judge asked her to speak. She stood, her voice clear but gentle. She explained the history of the ranch, how she worked with her husband through storms, droughts, and hardships, how she managed it alone after his passing, how she never once took what wasn't hers. She spoke not with anger but with sincerity. Then the judge turned to Daniel. Daniel stood slowly, his posture straight. He spoke in his steady, honest voice. He explained his role on the ranch, how he managed livestock, repaired structures, protected the land, and worked every day without complaint. He didn't speak about rumors or accusations. He simply spoke the truth, calm, quiet, and impossible to shake. The judge listened to both sides carefully. After reviewing the documents, evidence, and testimonies, he finally delivered his decision. The claim has no legal ground. The ranch remains with Mrs. Eleanor. The courtroom filled with murmurs. The relatives looked furious, their faces dark with frustration. But the townspeople looked at Eleanor with new respect. They looked at Daniel, too, finally seeing him not as a pawn. Eleanor let out a breath she had held for weeks. Daniel placed a gentle hand on her back, guiding her out of the courthouse. Outside, under the warm midday sun, they stood in silence, letting the meaning of the moment settle around them. The danger was over. The ranch was safe. And everyone in town had seen with their own eyes how united Daniel and Eleanor truly were. They climbed into the wagon again, but this time, the journey felt different. There was no tension in Eleanor's shoulders, no worry dragging her thoughts down. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and saw the man who had stood beside her not because she forced him, but because he chose to. When they reached the ranch, workers came running to greet them, eager for news. When Daniel nodded, confirming the victory, the workers cheered loudly. Even the horses seemed restless with excitement. The ranch, once filled with worry, now felt alive again. Later that evening, when the noise quieted and the sky turned orange with sunset, Eleanor found Daniel standing near the fence, looking out over the fields. She walked toward him, her steps slow. Daniel didn't turn, but he knew it was her. "Thank you," she said softly, stopping beside him. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "I do," she insisted gently. "You stood with me when I had no one else." Daniel looked out at the land, the grass moving gently with the wind. "This place matters to me too," he said, "and so do you." Eleanor felt warmth rise in her chest. The honesty in his voice was not loud, not dramatic, but it hit deeper than any speech could. She stood closer, their shoulders almost touching. "I have something to ask," she said quietly. Daniel turned to face her fully. The sun set, reflecting in his eyes. She felt nervous, but it wasn't the same fear she felt before this time. It was something softer. "In thanks. Do you still want to stay?" she asked. "Not because of danger, not because of responsibility, but because you want to." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He took one slow breath, then stepped closer, closing the small space between them. "I want to stay," he said. "I want to be here, with you." It was simple. It was genuine. And it made Eleanor's heart feel full, in a way she hadn't felt in years. Weeks later, when everything had settled, Daniel and Eleanor held a small ceremony on the ranch, not because the law needed it, not because fear pushed them, but because both hearts chose it freely. It wasn't a big event. Only a few workers, a friend from town, and the warm breeze that always seemed to bless the ranch. Eleanor wore a soft dress, simple but beautiful. Daniel wore the same neat shirt from the court day, but this time he added a small flower pinned to it. They stood beside the old oak tree, looking into each other's eyes while the sun formed golden halos around them. The vows were not dramatic. She promised companionship and trust. He promised protection and loyalty, not out of duty, but out of devotion. When they exchanged rings, the workers clapped, and even the horses neighed as if celebrating. After the ceremony, they walked together across the ranch as husband and wife. The land felt different now, more alive, more peaceful, more like home. The future was no longer uncertain. It was something they would build side by side. Daniel had arrived as a quiet cowboy searching for a place to belong. Eleanor had been a lonely widow, fighting shadows alone. But together, they found something stronger than fear, stronger than rumors, stronger than threats. They found a life they never expected, one built not on pressure or desperation, but on trust, respect, and a love that grew quietly, steadily, and beautifully on the land they both cherished.